My family called me the babysitter because saying doctor made them uncomfortable. My name is Dr. Liora Vance, and at Cumberland Ridge Medical Center, I opened chests, stopped bleeding, and made life or death decisions before sunrise. But at my brother's lake house on Norris Lake, my mother introduced me to her church friends as the woman watching the kids. Then my 6-year-old nephew Colton disappeared under the water. While everyone screamed, I jumped in, pulled him out, and breathed for him until his heart found its rhythm again. And when we reached the ER, the chief walked into the waiting room, looked past my family, and said the name they had spent years refusing to say, Chapter 1. The doctor they refused to see. I have held a stranger's chest open at 2 a.m. while a nurse counted blood units beside me and a resident tried not to shake. I have stood under the white lights of a trauma bay at Cumberland Ridge Medical Center in Knoxville, Tennessee, with my hands inside the worst moment of someone else's life, and I have learned how quiet the world becomes when there is no room left for panic. My name is Dr. Liora Vance. I was 36 years old in July of 2025, and I was an attending trauma surgeon at Cumberland Ridge, a Level I trauma center that took the cases other hospitals in East Tennessee could not keep alive long enough to fix. Car wrecks from Alcoa Highway, falls from roofing jobs, hunting accidents, ruptured spleens, collapsed lungs, teenagers pulled from twisted metal on Route 129. That was my work. Not glamorous, not gentle. Not something you could explain over potato salad at a family cookout without watching people's faces change. I had spent almost my entire adult life getting there. Pre-med at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville from 2007 to 2011. Medical school at UT Health Science Center College of Medicine from 2011 to 2015. General surgery residency from 2015 to 2020. Trauma and Surgical Critical Care Fellowship from 2020 to 2022. I became an attending in 2022 and board certified in 2023. Those years were not a line on a resume to me. They were missed birthdays, cold coffee, 12-hour operations, 36-hour shifts, and the particular loneliness of becoming very good at saving other people while slowly disappearing from your own family. At the hospital, nobody had trouble saying my name. Donna Whitcomb, our 58-year-old night shift charge nurse, used to walk past the trauma board with her coffee and say, "When Dr. Vance is on, I sleep better." Donna had been a nurse longer than some residents had been alive, and if Donna trusted you in a trauma bay, it meant more than any framed certificate. Maria Ortega, one of our ER nurses, could read a room faster than most doctors could read a scan. I never had to explain myself to them. They knew exactly what I did because they were there when it mattered. That is why I need to say this clearly. There is nothing small about being a nurse. Nurses save lives every day. My mother was not honoring nurses when she called me one. She was refusing to say what I was. In Maryville, Tennessee, inside the house where I grew up, I was not Dr. Vance. I was not a trauma surgeon. I was not the woman who had held pressure on an artery until the vascular team arrived, or opened a chest in under 3 minutes, or told a mother her son was going to live because every person in that room had done their job perfectly. At home, I was the daughter who helped at the hospital. That was my mother's phrase. Lorraine Vance said it with a soft smile, like she was smoothing a wrinkle out of a tablecloth. She was 63 then, still careful with her lipstick, still on 3 church committees, still the kind of woman who could organize a bake sale, a funeral luncheon, and a Christmas program without ever letting anyone see her sweat. People at church thought she was gracious. They thought she was humble. They thought she was proud of both her children. She was very proud of one of us. My brother, Grant Vance, was 40, broad-shouldered, easy smiling, and exactly the kind of son my father understood. He ran Vance and Sons Construction, the company Dad had built from a pickup truck, 2 ladders, and a reputation for showing up when he said he would. Grant wore work boots to family dinners and talked about permits, foundations, retaining walls, and crews that needed managing. My father, Dale Vance, 66 and mostly retired, loved that. He loved work he could point to. A deck, a roof line, a subdivision road cut through red Tennessee clay. Grant built real things, Dad liked to say. The first time he said it in front of me, I had just come off a night shift, where we lost 1 patient and saved 3. I remember standing in my parents' kitchen with hospital soap still drying out my hands, listening to Dad tell a neighbor how Grant had poured 40 yards of concrete in one day. Then he clapped Grant on the shoulder and said, "That is real work." I waited for him to look at me. He did not. In the hallway at my parents' house, Grant's contractor license hung in a black frame beside a newspaper clipping about a 32-home subdivision his company had landed. There was a photo of him shaking hands with a county supervisor, another of him and Dad standing in front of a half-built house, both of them smiling like they had just raised a monument. My medical degree was in the hall closet. I found it there by accident one Thanksgiving, behind the vacuum cleaner, wrapped in the same cardboard mailer I had sent it home in after graduation. My board certification was beside it, still in its envelope. I stood there for a long time with the closet door open, hearing my mother laugh in the dining room, while my father asked Grant whether the county inspector had signed off on his latest build. That was when I understood something I should have understood sooner. They knew. That was the part that hurt most. My family had seen the diploma. They had received the photographs. They had heard the words residency, fellowship, board certified, trauma surgeon. They did not misunderstand my life. They minimized it because admitting what I had become would have required rearranging the whole family story. In 2023, I called my mother after I passed my boards. I was sitting in the hospital parking garage, still wearing scrubs, too tired to drive and too proud not to tell someone. Mom said, "That is nice, honey." Then she asked if I had heard Grant had signed the contract for the new subdivision off Montvale Road. Dad did not come to my residency completion. Grant said he had a concrete pour. Mom said the drive was too much that weekend. The person who took the picture of me in my white coat was Dr. Rebecca Calloway, our ER chief and trauma medical director. Grant was never cruel in the obvious ways. He did not call me names. He did not laugh when Mom said I helped at the hospital. He just let her say it. He let Dad talk around me. He let every dinner reshape me into something smaller because the shape of the family worked better that way. He was the son who stayed. The son who built, the son who made sense, but he knew. I know he knew because his son knew. Colton was 6 that summer, all knees and questions and sticky fingers, with Grant's dark hair and Kristen's wide blue eyes. He called me Aunt Liora, except when he was trying to sound grown-up. Then he called me Dr. Aunt Liora and laughed so hard at himself that I never had the heart to correct him. Grant had told him I was a doctor. Somewhere, when the adults were not performing for each other, the truth had slipped out. The Saturday everything changed started with a text from Grant. "We are doing the lake house this weekend. Norris Lake. You should come. Colton keeps asking." I stared at the message from the edge of the call room bed at Cumberland Ridge. My hair smelled like antiseptic. My shoulders ached from a night that had started with a motorcycle crash and ended with a teenager whose parents would get to take her home because our team had moved fast enough. I wanted sleep. I wanted silence. I wanted one weekend without my mother, turning my life into a polite little hobby. Then my phone rang. "Aunt Liora," Colton said before I even said hello. Daddy says maybe you are coming. I learned to float. I can show you if you come. His excitement went straight through the part of me that had already decided no. I asked him if he had a life vest. He sighed like I had asked him about taxes. Mom says I am a good swimmer. That was not an answer. Save me a spot on the dock, buddy, I said. Before I left Knoxville the next morning, I packed like the person my family thought was dramatic. Gauze, tape, a pen light, gloves, a pocket CPR mask, and a small emergency kit I kept in my car because trauma surgeons do not believe in harmless accidents. Then I stopped at a sporting goods store and bought a child's life vest in Colton's size. I could already hear Grant teasing me. I could hear Kristen laughing under her breath. I could hear my mother saying, "Liora, please do not make everything medical." But that was the thing about my work. You saw enough ordinary afternoons turn into autopsies, and you stopped trusting ordinary afternoons. By late morning, I was driving north toward Norris Lake with the July sun flashing through the trees and the child's life vest lying across the back seat like an accusation. The closer I got, the brighter everything looked. Green hills, blue sky, water shining through the breaks in the road. A perfect Tennessee summer day. Perfect days are the ones people stop watching. When I turned down the gravel drive and saw Grant's new lake house through the trees, I could hear music, laughter, and children shouting somewhere near the water. For 1 second, it almost looked safe. Chapter 2. The Golden Sun's Lake House sat at the end of a gravel drive, brown A-frame roofline tucked between oak trees, with a wraparound porch facing the water like it had been built for a magazine spread. Grant had strung Edison lights along the railing, even though the sun was still high. There was a pergola near the side yard, a smoker breathing hickory into the July heat, and a long folding table covered with potato salad, deviled eggs, baked beans, sliced watermelon, and a pitcher of sweet tea sweating through its glass. Kristen had staged the whole thing beautifully. Of course she had. She was 38, part-time realtor, full-time curator of her own life. By the time I parked, she was already standing near the porch steps, with her phone held high, angling the camera so the lake shimmered behind her and the messier parts of real life stayed outside the frame. Grant was near the grill, laughing with 2 men from his crew. Dad was beside him, one hand on the porch rail, looking at that house like Grant had just built the Parthenon. "You made it," Kristen called, smiling in a way that never reached her eyes. "We honestly didn't think you'd come. Your little hospital thing keeps you so busy. Trauma surgery is a lot of things, Kristen," I said, taking my bag from the passenger seat. "Little isn't one of them." She blinked once, then laughed as if I had made a joke. "Well, since you're here, could you help me bring the cooler around back?" That was how my family handled correction. They stepped over it like a shoe in the hallway. Grant came over and clapped me on the shoulder with one hand, already turning to point at the house with the other. "Pretty good, right? Closed on it in April. Had to redo half the deck, reinforce the retaining wall, fix the drainage, but she's just a lad now. Dad hurt him and came alive." He walked me along the porch as if he were giving a tour of a cathedral. Grant handled the railing himself. Grant found the crew for the stonework. Grant knew the county inspector from that subdivision off Montvale Road. Grant had an eye for structure. Grant knew what would last. "He builds real things," Dad said, not even looking at me when he said it. The words landed where they always landed, somewhere between my ribs, where years of similar sentences had already made a bruise. I looked past him at the dock, stretching into Norris Lake. It was new enough that the boards had not yet grayed, and it sat low over the water, clean and pretty and wrong in ways I saw before anyone else did. No life ring, no posted rules, no gate at the steps. No railing along the open side where the water turned from green to a darker blue just a few feet from the edge. Children were already down there. Colton saw me first. "Aunt Liora," he yelled, running up the hill with his wet hair plastered to his forehead. Behind him, Maddie Hayes and her brother Owen chased each other with dripping pool noodles, both of them barefoot, both of them too close to the drop-off. Tara McLean, their mother, stood up on the lawn with a plastic cup in one hand, talking to Kristen and not watching the water. Colton threw his arms around my waist. "I brought the vest," I told him quietly. He made a face. "I can float now. I believe you, buddy. The vest is not because you are bad at swimming. It is because lakes do not care how proud we are." He considered that with the serious face only 6-year-olds can make, then ran back toward the grass when Grant called him. I found Grant by the grill and asked where he kept the life ring. He looked at me like I had asked where he kept the defibrillator. Life ring, yes. For the doc. He laughed and glanced toward one of his construction guys, as if they were sharing a private joke. "It's a lake, Liora, not an operating room. Lessons are not supervision," I said. "A dock is not a pool. Colton knows better than to go out too far, and we're all right here. No one was right there. That was the problem." Everyone was near the water. Nobody was watching it. I went back to my car, pulled out the child's life vest, and set it on the porch bench where Colton could see it. Kristen noticed and gave me a tight smile. "You brought your own props now." I did not answer, because my mother's voice carried from the porch before I could. Liora Vance stood in the center of her church circle, wearing white capris, wedge sandals, and the soft public smile she used for women who brought casseroles when someone died. Darlene Holt was there, Pastor Samuel Holt's wife, with her silver hair pinned at the back of her neck. Ellen Porter stood beside her, fanning herself with a paper plate. Mom waved me over. "This is my daughter, Liora. She helps up at the hospital." Ellen's face brightened politely. "Oh, a nurse." I waited one beat for my mother to correct her. She did not. "Trauma surgery, actually," I said. Mom's smile tightened. "Yes, she's always been good in a crisis. Darlene, you have to try the corn salad before Dale eats it all." Just like that, the sentence vanished. Not corrected. Not acknowledged. Folded under potato salad and church laughter like it had never happened. A little later, Dad raised a plastic cup of sweet tea and tapped it with a fork until people turned toward him. He talked about the house, about Grant's hard work, about Vance and Son's construction, about what it meant to build something your family could stand on. He said Grant and Kristen had created a place where memories would be made for years. Lorraine put one hand over her heart and added that Kristen had been such a blessing to the family. Nobody said my name. I stood near the edge of the group with a cup of water in my hand, watching the sunlight flash off the lake. I had spent years training my face not to react in operating rooms, but family had a way of cutting through places surgery never touched. Then Lorraine found Darlene again near the porch steps and nodded toward me with that soft little laugh. "Liora is basically our babysitter for the day. She's always so good with Colton." The word hit harder than nurse because it was not a mistake anyone could defend. Colton heard it from the bottom step. He looked up at me, confused. "Why did Grandma call you the babysitter? You're a doctor." For a second, all the noise of the cookout thinned out. The adults missed it or pretended to. I looked down at him, at the sincerity in his face, and felt something in me ache so sharply I almost smiled. "Because Grandma sometimes forgets how to say things correctly," I said, but I knew better. Lorraine did not forget. She selected. She softened. She reshaped me in public until I fit the version of daughterhood she could tolerate. Kristen called from inside the kitchen before Colton could ask another question. "Liora, could you grab the napkins from the drawer by the counter?" My hands are full. Her hands were not full. She was adjusting the angle of a charcuterie board for a photo. Inside, the kitchen smelled like lemon cleaner and barbecue sauce. I found the drawer, and beside it on the counter sat a manila folder with my mother's name written across the tab. Liora Vance, Medical Directive. Dr. Hess, I would have ignored it, except one page had slipped loose, and my name was visible halfway down the top sheet. I did not dig. I did not open drawers or search through private things. I simply touched the page with my name on it and pulled it far enough to understand why it had stopped me. Advanced Healthcare Directive. Primary Healthcare Proxy, Grant Vance. Physician Consult, Dr. Raymond Hess. Then, in my mother's neat handwriting under additional notes, do not put this burden on Liora. She has already given enough of her life to hospitals. I stood there with the napkins in one hand, reading the sentence twice. My mother had not chosen the trauma surgeon to make medical decisions. She had chosen the contractor, not because Grant knew medicine. Not because I could not handle crisis, because somewhere inside my mother, my work was still not expertise. It was a wound. Rosemary Bell Vance came back to me then. My grandmother Rose, the woman I knew mostly through old photographs and the careful silence that followed her name. She had been a midwife in rural Tennessee, the kind of woman people called when roads flooded and babies came anyway. She died on a rainy night driving home from a delivery when my mother was 14. Lorraine had grown up believing that caring for other people could steal a mother from her child. I understood that fear. But understanding a wound does not make you responsible for letting it bleed on you forever. Grandma Rose explained why hospitals scared my mother. She did not explain why my mother had spent years making me smaller every time she said my name. I put the page back exactly where it had been and carried the napkins outside. My mother was with Ellen again, her voice light, almost cheerful. Liora answers phones up at the hospital sometimes, she was saying. Helps with bandages, that sort of thing. I stopped at the edge of the porch. For once, I was going to correct her in front of everyone, not gently, not with a smile she could step over. My mouth opened, then I looked toward the dock. The laughter was wrong. Not gone, just missing one sound. Maddie and Owen were on the grass. Tara was turning toward the table. Grant was still near the grill. Colton was not on the dock. The water behind it was too still. At first, all I saw was a patch of blue fabric floating where no blue fabric should have been. Then the shape resolved. Small shoulders. Dark hair. Face down, Colton was 15 feet from the dock, motionless on the surface of the lake. Chapter 3. When the water went quiet, he moved before thought could become fear. The napkins fell from my hand. I was already running before anyone around me understood what I had seen. The porch steps blurred under my feet. Grass slapped wet against my ankles. Someone said my name. Maybe my mother. Maybe Darlene. But it came from far away, from a world where people still had time to misunderstand things. I hit the dock at a sprint. Colton. No answer. The lake was colder than it should have been for July. It shocked the air from my lungs when I went in, shoes and clothes dragging me down for half a second before training took over. I kicked hard, reached him, and rolled him face up before his weight could pull both of us under. His head lolled against my forearm. His lips were pale. His eyes were half open and empty in a way no child's eyes should ever be. Behind me, the shouting finally started. "Colton, somebody get him! Oh my God!" I hooked one arm under his chin, keeping his face out of the water, and kicked toward the dock. He felt too still. That was the worst part. Not heavy, not light. Still, Grant reached down when I got close, but his hands were wild, useless. "Don't pull his arms," I snapped. "Under his shoulders. Now." For once, my brother did exactly what I told him. He and one of his crewmen helped lift Colton onto the dock. I climbed up after him, knees scraping against the boards, and dropped beside my nephew. The whole lake house had gone silent except for Kristen screaming, "Colton, baby, Colton! Wake up!" I pressed 2 fingers to his neck, watched his chest, listened for breath. Nothing normal. A faint movement, maybe a gasp, maybe not enough. His lips were blue at the edges. "Call 911 now," I shouted. "Pediatric drowning. Not breathing. CPR in progress." Darlene Holt was the first one to move. She grabbed her phone with both hands shaking. I'm calling now!" Tara McLean pulled Maddie and Owen back from the dock so hard Owen cried out. Dale stood frozen on the grass with one hand over his mouth. Lorraine was at the edge of the porch, white-faced, one hand gripping the railing like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Kristen dropped to her knees beside me and reached for Colton. "Don't touch him," I said. "He's my son, I know. Don't touch him. Kristen, move back. I need to hold him. You need to let me breathe for him." That broke through. Her hand stopped in the air. I tilted Colton's head, opened his airway, sealed my mouth over his, and gave the first rescue breath. Then the second. His chest rose, not enough, but it rose. I moved to compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My voice changed in those moments. It always did. It became flat and hard and useful. There was no daughter in it. No ignored sister. No woman who had just read her mother's medical directive and felt something inside her crack. There was only a child on wet boards who needed oxygen. 16, 17, 18. Grant hovered too close. "Grant, move back. Give me room." He moved. That was when I understood how scared he was. Grant Vance, the golden son, the builder, the man my father thought could fix anything with a crew and a truck, stepped back because his son was dying, and I was the only person on that dock who knew what to do. 28, 29, 30. 2 breaths again. Then compressions. Kristen sobbed into both hands. "Please, please, please." Dale took 1 step onto the dock and stopped. He could not finish. "No one talks," I said. "Someone tell me when EMS is coming." Darlene's voice shook behind me. "They're on the line. They said 12 minutes, maybe less." Too long, I thought. I had worked traumas where 12 minutes was the difference between a scar and a funeral. But I did not say that. Words had to earn their place now. Another round. 2 breaths. 30 compressions. My palms were slick. Colton's skin was cold under my hands. I counted because counting keeps panic from taking shape. On the 3rd cycle, his body jerked. At first, it was so small I almost thought I had imagined it. Then he coughed, a raw, ugly sound that tore through the silence, and lake water spilled from his mouth onto the boards. Kristen screamed his name again, but this time the sound changed. It was still terror, but there was life inside it. I rolled Colton onto his side, keeping his airway clear. "Easy, buddy. Breathe. That's it. Breathe." He took another breath, ragged and wet. Grant sank down to 1 knee, both hands on his head. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" "Do not sit him up," I said. "Do not give him water. Do not put anything in his mouth." Kristen cried, "Is he okay?" I kept my fingers on Colton's pulse and watched the rise of his chest. "He's breathing. That does not mean he's safe." Her face crumpled. "What does that mean?" "It means the ambulance still takes him. Drowning does not end just because a child coughs. His lungs need to be checked. He needs oxygen. He needs monitoring." My mother whispered from somewhere behind me, "Lord, have mercy." I did not look at her. The paramedics arrived in 11 or 12 minutes, though it felt both instant and endless. Caleb Morris came first, stocky, mid-40s, gray at the temples, carrying himself like a man who had walked into too many yards where families were already bargaining with God. "What do we have?" I gave report without thinking. 6-year-old male. Pediatric drowning. Estimated submersion under 2 minutes, found face down, apneic or agonal respirations on retrieval. 2 rescue breaths, CPR started immediately, approximately 90 seconds before spontaneous breathing returned. Currently breathing, airway clear, color improving. Need pulse ox and transport for observation. Caleb looked at me for half a beat. U medical, trauma, surgery, Cumberland Ridge. Something in his face settled. That explains why he has a chance. Kristen heard it. Grant heard it. Darlene heard it. My mother heard it too, because her eyes flicked toward me and away again as if the words had burned. They put oxygen on Colton. His pulse ox read 91 at first, then 92, then 93. Not perfect. Better. Better mattered. Colton made a small sound when they lifted him onto the stretcher. "Aunt Liora," he rasped. I leaned close. "I'm here, buddy. Cold, I know. They're going to warm you up." Kristen climbed into the ambulance with him, still crying, one hand pressed to her chest as if she were holding herself together. Grant started to follow, then stopped when Caleb told him only one parent could ride. For the first time that day, my brother looked lost. The ambulance doors closed. Only then did my hand start shaking. Not when I saw him in the water. Not when I jumped. Not when I breathed into his lungs or pressed down on his small chest while my family watched me do the work they had spent years making sound small. After. That is how adrenaline works. It waits until the child is breathing before it lets you become human again. Grant stood a few feet away from me, soaked where he had knelt, his face gray. "Liora," he said. I looked at him. He opened his mouth, but no apology came out. No explanation. No thank you. Just my name, finally said like it belonged to someone he did not know how to face. Behind him, Lorraine's voice trembled. "Thank God Grant got him up fast." The words moved through the air slowly, ugly and familiar. Darlene turned her head and looked at my mother. She did not argue. She did not need to. The silence she gave Lorraine was sharper than correction. I walked past them toward my car to follow the ambulance, water dripping from my clothes onto the gravel. My phone buzzed before I opened the door. It was the family group chat. Vanessa Pike had written, "Colton had an accident. Grant and Kristen are shaken. Pray for them." A second later, someone asked what happened. Vanessa replied, "He fell in. Family got him out." I stared at the words until they blurred. Family. Not me. Not Dr. Vance. Not the person who had pulled him from the lake and breathed for him while everyone else froze. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat and drove halfway to Knoxville. It buzzed again. This time it was Donna Whitcomb. "Heard a pediatric drowning is coming in from Norris. Are you okay?" I had to pull in one breath before I could keep driving. The hospital knew how to find me in a crisis. My family still did not. By the time I reached Cumberland Ridge Medical Center, my clothes were stiff with lake water, and my knees burned where the doc had scraped them. I walked into the ER waiting room without a white coat, without a badge visible, without anything that made me look like the version of myself the hospital knew. Grant was already there, sitting forward with his elbows on his knees. Dale stood by the wall. Lorraine sat perfectly upright, hands folded in her lap, her face pale and unreadable. No one called me a babysitter. No one called me a helper. For the first time in my life, my family seemed unsure what name they were allowed to use. Then Maria Ortega came through the double doors, stopped mid-step, and stared at me. "Dr. Vance?" Every head in the waiting room turned. Chapter 4. Dr. Vance Maria did not look around to see who had heard her. She was not making a point. That was what made it worse for my family. She said it the way she would have said it any other night in that ER. "Natural, automatic, certain. Dr. Vance, are you hurt?" I became aware of my clothes all at once. Lake water had dried stiff against my shirt. My knees burned. My hands were scraped red from the dock and compressions. I must have looked like someone who had wandered in from an accident scene, not someone who worked 3 floors above it. "I'm fine," I said. "Colton Vance is my nephew. Pediatric drowning from Norris Lake. Ems brought him in. Maria's face softened in the way nurses soften without losing focus. They have him in Pediatric Bay 4. He's on oxygen. They're getting imaging and labs. Do you need scrubs? No. I need to know if he's breathing well. He is breathing. Let them work him." That was Maria. Kind, direct, and impossible to move when she was right. Behind me, my family had gone silent. Kristen sat with both hands pressed over her mouth, eyes swollen from crying. Dale stared at Maria like she had spoken a language he should have learned years ago. Lorraine's face had gone tight, not confused, exactly. More like a woman watching a curtain get pulled open before she was ready. Grant looked down. He was not surprised. That mattered. My brother had known. He had told Colton I was a doctor. He had let his little boy say Dr. Aunt Liora in the living room, and then stood beside my mother at cookouts while she turned me into a helper. The shame on his face was not the shock of learning something new. It was the shame of hearing someone else say out loud what he had known and hidden behind silence. Lorraine recovered first. She always did when there were witnesses. "Of course," she said lightly, too lightly. "We know Liora works here." Maria's eyes moved to my mother, then back to me. She did not correct her. She did not have to. She handed me a warm blanket from a nearby cart and said, "Dr. Vance, sit before you fall over." Darlene Holt, who had been standing near the row of chairs with Ellen Porter, looked from Maria to my mother. Lorraine leaned toward her, voice lowered but not enough. Grant got him up so fast. Liora helped with the breathing part. Darlene's expression changed. "Lorraine," she said, quiet but clear, "I watched your daughter pull him from the water." No one spoke after that. The double doors opened before my mother could answer. Dr. Rebecca Calloway came through, in navy scrubs, silver hair pulled back, badge clipped at her chest. She was 54, sharp-eyed, and the kind of physician who could make an entire trauma bay straighten just by walking in. She had seen me lose patients. She had seen me save them. She had once taken a picture of me at my residency completion because my own parents had not made the drive. She stopped when she saw me soaked in a waiting room chair. Dr. Vance, 2 words, not loud, not dramatic. But they landed harder than anything anyone had said all day. I stood because old habits are hard to break around Calloway. Dr. Calloway. She looked me over, then at my family. "I hear you pulled a 6-year-old from the lake, my nephew, and performed CPR before EMS arrived." "Yes." Calloway turned slightly, not to perform, not to punish, but because my family was sitting there with their mouths closed for the first time in my memory. "Dr. Vance is one of our trauma surgeons," she said. "Your grandson is alive because she knew exactly what to do." Kristen made a broken sound and covered her face. Lorraine tried again, softer this time. "We know she works here." Calloway's gaze settled on her. "She does not just work here. She is Dr. Liora Vance, attending trauma surgeon." There was no anger in her voice. That was why it cut so cleanly. She did not need to defend me. She was stating a fact, the same way she would state blood pressure or oxygen saturation. My title was not a family opinion. It was not something my mother could edit for church women. It was a fact. Calloway stepped closer to me. "Colton's oxygen saturation is improving. Last check was 98 on supplemental oxygen. Chest X-ray doesn't show anything alarming right now. Lung sounds are good, but we're keeping him for 24-hour observation. Drowning does not always declare itself immediately." I nodded. My body understood before my heart did. "Can I see him?" "In a few minutes." Let pediatrics finish. A woman in a hospital ID badge, approached us then, calm professional carrying a tablet. She introduced herself as Nina Bellamy, pediatric safety liaison and social worker. Grant stiffened immediately. "This is not an accusation," Nina said. "After a pediatric drowning, we ask standard safety questions for documentation and prevention." Kristen looked terrified. "What kind of questions? Who was supervising the children at the time? Whether he was wearing a life vest, whether there was a life ring on the dock, how far he was from shore, whether 911 was called immediately, whether any adults had been drinking." The room shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. Grant rubbed both hands over his face. "He takes swim lessons," he said. Nina's voice stayed level. "Swimming lessons are not supervision." No one had an answer for that. I watched my brother absorb it, not as criticism from me, which he could dismiss as me turning everything into an operating room. This came from the hospital, from a system, from people whose job was to write down what happened before anyone could make it prettier. Later, when a resident updated the chart, I saw one line on the screen as I passed the workstation bystander CPR performed by Dr. Liora Vance. I did not ask anyone to write it that way. I did not need to. It was simply accurate. That was the strange mercy of records. They did not care who was the golden child. They did not soften a mother's lie to keep Thanksgiving comfortable. They recorded who breathed for the child before the ambulance arrived. Grant found me in the hallway outside pediatrics while Kristen was with Colton. "Liora." I looked at him and waited. His face was wrecked in a way I had never seen. Not just afraid, stripped. "I knew," he said. The words were barely above a whisper. I did not help him. He swallowed. "I knew you were a doctor." "Of course I knew," I told Colton. "He asked what you did, and I told him. I never corrected Mom. Not really. Why?" He looked toward the waiting room, where Dale sat with his elbows on his knees and Lorraine stared at the floor. "Because it was easier when they were proud of me." That was the most honest thing my brother had ever said to me. I felt no victory in it, only exhaustion. "I don't need you ashamed in a hospital hallway, Grant. I need you to stop benefiting from them making me smaller." His eyes filled, but he did not argue. That was new too. A nurse came to say Colton was asking for me. I went in quietly. He looked impossibly small in the bed, a blanket tucked under his arms, oxygen tubing under his nose, hair still damp at the edges. Kristen sat beside him, holding one hand like she was afraid he might vanish if she loosened her grip. Colton turned his head when he saw me. "Aunt Liora!" "Hey, buddy!" His voice was thin. "You saved me because you're a doctor, right?" I sat on the edge of the chair beside his bed. "Because I'm your aunt," I said, "and because I knew what to do." He seemed satisfied with that. His eyes drifted shut again. When I stepped back into the hallway, my phone buzzed. Kristen had posted a story, a close-up of Colton's small hand in hers, hospital bracelet visible, with the caption, "So thankful our family pulled together today. No mention of the lake. No CPR. No Dr. Vance." I locked the screen and put the phone away. Then I saw my mother standing outside the room. Lorraine had no church smile left. No soft correction. No smaller word waiting on her tongue. She looked at me as if she had finally reached the end of a sentence she could not rewrite. For the first time in my life, my mother had nothing to call me. Chapter 5. The record did what they wouldn't. I did not ask her to say anything. There are moments when silence tells you more than any apology could. My mother stood in that hallway outside Pediatric Bay 4 with her purse clutched in both hands and her church smile gone, and for once, she had no smaller word ready. No helper. No nurse said with that soft, evasive tone, "No hospital thing. No babysitter." The hospital had named me before she could rename me. Colton stayed overnight. His oxygen stayed steady. His chest x-ray remained clear. By the next morning, The pediatric team told Grant and Kristen there was no sign of aspiration pneumonia and no delayed respiratory distress. He would be tired, scared, and sore from coughing, but he was going home. Kristen cried when they discharged him. Grant held the paperwork like it weighed more than lumber, concrete, and every permit his company had ever filed. I went back to work 3 days later. People kept telling me I had saved my nephew's life. I understood why they said it, but it never felt like heroism to me. It felt like math. A child was not breathing. Air had to go in. Blood had to move. Time had to be stolen back one compression at a time. That was not glory. That was the job. Still, the record mattered. Caleb Morris wrote in the EMS report that CPR had been initiated before paramedic arrival by Dr. Liora Vance. The hospital chart said the same thing in cleaner language. Bystander CPR performed by Dr. Liora Vance. I did not ask anyone to write it. I did not need to. The truth had finally entered a system my family could not charm, edit, or soften for church. A week after the drowning, Grant called me. He sounded tired in a way I had never heard from him before. Not busy, not proud. Tired. He said Mark Riley, from the homeowner insurance side, had come out to look at the property. He said Mark had walked the dock, checked the slope, asked about the missing life ring, asked whether children had been required to wear life vests, asked whether neighbor kids had been near the water. Grant tried to explain that Colton took swim lessons. Mark told him what Nina Bellamy had already said in the hospital. Swim lessons are not supervision. Grant did not argue this time. He told me that if Maddie or Owen had gone in instead of Colton, Tara McLean's family would have had every reason to ask why an open dock had no life ring and no rules. He said the words civil liability like a man who had finally discovered that consequences could be built from paper, just as surely as houses could be built from wood. I did not comfort him. I only said I was glad he understood. The next Saturday, a photo arrived on my phone. No speech, no long apology. Just Grant's dock at Norris Lake with a red life ring mounted beside the steps, a deep water sign fixed to the post, a new latch on the gate, and 3 small life vests hanging from hooks where the children could reach them. Under the photo, Grant wrote 6 words, "Kids wear them." No exceptions. It was the first apology from my brother that did not ask me to make him feel better. That same week, Vanessa Pike tried to clean the story up in the family group chat. She wrote that Lorraine had only used the wrong word because everyone had been scared. She wrote that families should not pick at each other after a traumatic event. She wrote that what mattered was Colton was fine. This time, Grant answered before I did. He wrote that Mom had used the wrong word for years. He wrote that I was a trauma surgeon. He wrote that I pulled his son from the lake and performed CPR before EMS arrived. Then he wrote that he should have corrected people a long time ago. I stared at that message longer than I expected. It did not erase anything. It did not give me back the graduations they missed, the dinners where I had been reduced to something convenient, or the years my father praised real work while I drove back to Knoxville with hospital soap drying out my hands. But it changed the room. A few days later, Grant sent another photo. My medical degree and board certification had been framed and hung on the wall at Vance and Sons Construction, beside his contractor license. The same degree my mother had left in a closet, beside a vacuum cleaner, was now hanging where clients' crews and my father would see it. I did not need Grant's wall to know who I was. But I will not pretend it meant nothing. Kristen took longer. Her first Instagram story after the hospital had said our family pulled together. It had shown Colton's tiny hand with a hospital bracelet and not one word about who pulled him from the water. Darlene Holt commented beneath it, "Grateful Dr. Liora Vance performed CPR before EMS arrived." Tara McLean liked the comment. 2 other women from church did too. Kristen deleted the story. An hour later, she posted again. This time, the caption said Colton was home because Dr. Liora Vance pulled him from the water and performed CPR until EMS arrived. It was not poetic. It was not warm. It was not even especially graceful. But it was accurate, and for Kristen, accuracy without flattering lighting was growth. She texted me that night and said she was sorry for calling my work a little hospital thing. She said she had been scared and embarrassed and had wanted the story to look less terrible. I believed that. I also knew looking good had always been easier for her than telling the whole truth. I replied that I was glad Colton was safe. Nothing more. Dad left a voicemail 2 nights later. It was almost 2 minutes long, which for Dale Vance was practically a sermon. He said he had been thinking about what he called real work. He said he understood Grant's work because he could stand on it, touch it, measure it, drive past it. He said he had not understood mine because the people I saved walked away, and there was no porch, no roof line, no driveway left behind with my name on it. Then his voice broke. He said he was sorry he missed my residency completion. Sorry he never hung my diploma. Sorry he had made me feel like the only work that counted was work done by hands that held hammers instead of scalpels. It was not perfect. He was not perfect. But for the first time, my father sounded like a man trying to see me instead of the empty space beside Grant. My mother did not call. For 5 days, Lorraine said nothing. A silence from her used to feel like punishment. This time, it felt like she had lost the right to use it that way. On Sunday afternoon, Darlene Holt texted me from church in Blount County. She said my mother had stood near the fellowship hall, in front of Ellen Porter, Pastor Samuel Holt, and the same women who had heard her call me the babysitter. Then she said it correctly. My son Grant runs Vance & Sons Construction, and my daughter is Dr. Liora Vance. A trauma surgeon at Cumberland Ridge Medical Center, Darlene added that there had been no joke after it, no little laugh, no hospital thing, just the sentence. I sat at my kitchen table in Knoxville and read the message 3 times. Later that week, I went to my parents' house. Mom met me on the porch. She looked older, not because of wrinkles, but because for once she was not arranging her face for an audience. She said, Grandma Rose's name before she said mine. She told me hospitals had always felt like places that took women away. She told me she had spent her life afraid that if she let herself be proud of what I did, she would also have to admit she was terrified of losing me to it. I listened. Then I told her the truth. Grandma Rose explained why hospitals scared her. Grandma Rose did not explain why she made me smaller every time she said my name. My mother cried then, quietly, without reaching for me. I was grateful for that. I was not ready to be held by the same hands that had folded my life into something harmless for other people. I told her if she wanted to be in my life, she could start with one rule. She would never call me by a smaller name again. A month later, Grant invited me back to the lake house. It was not a big party this time. No staged photos. No toast about real work. Colton came running across the grass wearing a bright orange life vest. He threw his arms around me and said, Dad says the vest is not optional. I looked toward the dock. The life ring was there. The gate was latched. Grant stood close to the water, actually watching the children. Kristen had her phone in her pocket. Dad gave me a small nod from the porch, not enough to fix the past, but enough to say he was trying. Mom looked at me once and did not change my title into anything softer. Dr. Calloway did not make me a doctor in that waiting room. The hospital chart did not give me my value. I had been Dr. Liora Vance long before my family was forced to hear it. What changed that summer was simpler. After the day Colton stopped breathing, no one in my family could call me by a smaller name and expect the room to believe them. I stood on the dock at Norris Lake, beside the new life ring, watching the water settle into a quiet that no longer felt like danger. It felt like a breath. Not forgiveness, not perfection. Just truth finally spoken correctly. If this story made you think of someone in your own family, tell me this. Who failed Liora more, the mother who kept shrinking her, or the brother who knew the truth and stayed silent? Leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories where the truth finally gets the last word.